Hey everyone, thank you so much for joining us. I just wanted to give you all a quick reminder that this is recorded, as well as if you are seeking CLE and CE credit, to please make sure that you're staying on for the full hour, the full webinar, because there will be polling questions placed throughout the presentation that we will need you to partake in to be able to get that credit. In the CLE or the Institute will be reaching out to you directly to get your credentials. So just keep a close eye on that for the next week or so for them to reach out. And if you do have any questions, please use the chat feature. We will be keeping a very close eye on that as well. If you have any questions, feel free to jump in and ask, and we'll make sure that those get answered.
Is that my cue, Miss Madison?
Yes, sir. Take it away.
So good morning, everyone. This is Sean Hoare, and some of you know me as the chair of the Cybersecurity and Data Privacy Group at Constangy Cyber, and I'm really fortunate this morning to be joined by Kellyn Wagner Ramsdell of Arete and my good friend Rich Goldberg. And I'm reminded today that Rich and I met over 25 years ago as cyber attorneys at our former U.S. Department of Justice, and really pleased to have him join us today. With regard to Kellyn, you will find she has got an incredible background in intelligence, threat intelligence as an analyst. She earned her undergraduate degree in Global Security and Intelligence Studies in the Security Operations Manager track at Embry-Riddle Aeronautical University. And I'm very familiar with that institution. I actually got a master's in that same state down in Florida, Florida State University, and that is an outstanding institution for aeronautical studies. She also obtained a master's degree in Security and Intelligence Studies at Embry-Riddle Aeronautical University as well. She served in various capacities as an intelligence analyst over the past 8 years, and she now serves as a director of threat intelligence at Arete. And she is going to provide some very unique insights to you this morning and this afternoon, wherever you might be located. With regard to Mr. Goldberg, you'll note that he's a tremendous underachiever. He went to this fledgling university called Brown, where he earned his undergraduate degree. He then obtained his law degree at Georgetown University, another just a scofflaw place where people go I shouldn't go to the rabbit hole, but very obviously esteemed universities for his undergraduate degree as well as his law degree. He then, at some point, he would join he was participating in the Special Investigations Unit, the Philadelphia District Attorney's Office, and then joined the U.S. Attorney's Office, where he served as a cyber attorney at the former U.S. Department of Justice for over 25 years before joining the Constangy Cyber Team. He served in a variety of executive capacities there. He also served as the crisis manager for national security events. Did a lot of training of law enforcement officers throughout the country with regard to crisis management and how to respond when they have mass protests. I did a lot of that work and was really seen as a thought leader with regard to handle those matters in crisis management for the Department of Justice. He also, on the side, is a lecturer in law or a law professor at Villanova University Charles Widger School of Law, in which he teaches about emerging law and technology. And of course, he now serves as a vice chair of Constangy Cyber. And I'm thoroughly pleased to turn it over to him to launch the program. Rich?
Thank you, Sean, for all of that. I am so happy to be here, mostly because Kellyn is a real expert, and she has such an incredible background in both how the U.S. government works, intel in the cyber area, and we're going to talk to you today about working with law enforcement. And as you can see there are some questions in the little bar there, why and why not? And I'd like to jump up and down and say, oh, you should always be working with the government. But that's not always the case, depending on what's in the interests of any particular client, any particular cyber event. So that's what we're going to talk about. Get a little outside of the standard insurance channel, although these questions are pretty much involved in every single cyber incident. So really happy to be here with Kellyn. So I know, Kellyn, Sean gave a little bit of your background. Why don't we move on to the next slide, and you give them the real background, not the Sean abbreviated background.
Thank you, Rich, and thank you, Sean, for the introduction. Good morning, good afternoon, everyone. My background I'll walk through from the perspective of the government agencies and where I got this knowledge, right? The government is hard to learn unless you've been in the seats. So I'm currently the Director of Intelligence at Arete, an incident response and managed security services firm, where I do the attribution, identify who the threat actor is when you are responding to a matter, and identify what that means for the response up to and including sanctions analysis. But prior to that, I was the cyber intelligence R&D lead at the MITRE Corporation, which is a federally funded research and development center. In that role, I was responsible for coordinating all R&D on cyber intelligence. So how we identify, detect, prevent threats for both defensive and offensive mission sets across the entire US intelligence community, Department of Defense, and federal civilian executive branch, in addition to some international governments. So having to work across the government to get them to share resources on R&D. Prior to that, I was on the intake squad actually at the Department of Defense's Cyber Crime Center, DC3, and the Department of Defense's Defense Industrial Base Collaborative Information Sharing Environment, DICE. Because if there's one thing the government loves, it's an acronym nested in an acronym, nested in an acronym. But what that means was I was on the team responsible for responding to intrusions at defense contractors and assessing the impact to national security. But a lot of the experience and kind of lessons learned are going to come from, I started my career as a cyber analyst in local law enforcement assigned to a fusion center in the days when there was not a lot of cyber expertise in the field. So responding to help victims understand in the early days of ransomware, what was even happening to their computers, what response looked like. Oftentimes that involves starting with, well, do you have cyber insurance? Because they didn't even know at the time because their risk managers had acquired their cyber insurance without ever having the conversation with the actual IT directors. But then also supporting law enforcement investigations at this local, state, tribal, territorial, and federal levels for information sharing and response to those actions. That'll pass it over to Rich for his background.
That was very impressive. So I'm almost shy around Kellyn. So as Sean said, I was at US DOJ almost 30 years. And prior to that was a local prosecutor in Philadelphia, working all kinds of cases, and eventually became the person in charge of the investigations division of the office. When I went to the U.S. Attorney's Office, I did everything from little drug deals to kidnappings to bank robberies, all the fraud stuff. And when they wanted somebody to go and learn computers, I was the only person who put my hand up. Every office in the country was supposed to have somebody who understood both how to get evidence from computers and how to investigate and prosecute a computer crime. And that preceded something called the CHIPS program, which was eventually formed by the DOJ and still exists today. CHIPS stands for Computer Hacking and Intellectual Property Section. And every U.S. Attorney's Office in the country has at least one CHIPS-trained lawyer. The big offices have, I mean, Northern California probably has a couple dozen of them because of Silicon Valley. But every other large office is going to have multiple CHIPS offices, and those are the people who can speak computer and can also reach out at the drop of a hat to the CSIP section, which is the computer crimes section at DOJ. Many of the CHIPS prosecutors, like me, were career prosecutors, and so not only understand how the statutes work and how to collect evidence, but also what is going to fit DOJ guidelines and what isn't. As Sean mentioned, in addition to being a CHIPS prosecutor, I became cyber crimes chief in Philadelphia, and then economic crimes, and eventually became the chief of trials, which meant I was in charge of all criminal trials in our district. Trying to be in 6 courtrooms at once is not easy. especially when nobody's listening to you. But I lost a lot of weight in that job, and so that was good for me. I did also do this crazy crisis management thing, which meant handling national special security events, presidential nominating conventions, and training the U.S. attorney's offices that were going to handle those events all around the country. So I've been in some very strange places with a lot of law enforcement officers. So the bottom line is I'm very used to dealing with law enforcement, both at the investigator level and the executive level, which is important as we go forward and talk about what the government is and how do you talk to them. It's important that you speak their language and that you understand who you're talking to and what the mission is, because they are mission driven, of everybody that's involved in cyberspace. So here's our agenda. So first we want to talk about who is the government. What are the relevant players? How do you build relationships with them? It is possible. It is important. It's not easy. And it changes all the time. And I think probably most importantly, when do you engage them? Why? And of course, the potential issues that come up when you do engage with government agencies. So we have to do the quiz questions, as you know. If you don't answer all 3 quiz questions, then you can't get credit. So, do you think government agencies are fully engaged in the fight against cybercrime? There is no wrong answer here. You'll be surprised to hear, except not answering the poll question. That's the wrong answer. So we'll give you just a minute or 2 to answer. Not even that. And pretty soon I'll start humming, which will drive everybody crazy and will mean that
About
you'll vote faster.
37% of you guys that have participated. So make sure you guys are getting your answers in here.
I say, what's the humming choice we're starting with, Rich? We're gonna go to like the Jeopardy theme song.
Yeah, I have to go with Jeopardy. I mean, it's a classic.
The classic.
Everybody knows what it means. And what percentage are we up to now?
We are at 89.
Okay. So you've got, I mean, this is actually the easiest question ever. So you've got like 3 more seconds. And then we're moving on.
All right, we're gonna go ahead and end that poll.
So, and the answer to the poll is, isn't that interesting? You don't trust your government. What a surprise. So, we'll see how you feel when we get to the end of this. Okay. Kellyn, who is the government?
What a question. Here we have 11 seals of agencies that have some level of cyber responsibilities in the US federal government. There are many more beyond these seals you see represented. And within each of these seals, in many cases, there are different elements that have different responsibilities. So when we look across the federal cyber enterprise, excluding where we talk about technically every office in the federal government has a cyber mission because they use computers in theory. Even the US Forest Service sparingly uses computers, so they have cyber responsibilities. But for our purposes, there's 5 main categories of functions that the federal civilian or the federal cyber enterprise may perform. The first being law enforcement. That's what a lot of people think of when they think of the government. And here, many of these agencies have law enforcement responsibilities. Most noteworthy and most famous, I think there we have the Federal Bureau of Investigation, the FBI. We have Rich's old location. The DOJ has strong law enforcement responsibilities. DHS within ICE, and particularly the Homeland Security investigations, they have law enforcement responsibilities. Many organizations, U.S. Postal Inspection Service is a law enforcement agency. In fact, one of the favorites to work with if you have any matter involving the mail, because that is their domain. And so these are agencies that are focused on capturing and prosecuting criminals. Rich, is that your experience on the law enforcement side of these agencies?
Yeah, yes, absolutely. It's part of their mission. As we'll talk a little bit, some are better at it than others. Some get more money to fight it than others. The one agency that we have in here as DHS is actually Secret Service, because they're now part of DHS, having moved over from Treasury. Secret Service is very heavily invested in catching cyber criminals.
Absolutely. They are a very good resource, especially if there's any financial theft or financial fraud in your cyber attack. But law enforcement's the one we think of. And then there's a second set of responsibilities in cyber, which is defense of the nation. Certainly that may include Department of Defense, where we may look at more defend forward concepts and move into some of our offensive space. But then we also have DHS has a very heavy defend the nation responsibility, both largely housed within the CISA organization, the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency. And then we also, CISA is really one of the largest organizations that's got that defend the nation responsibility. We then also have agencies here that have regulatory responsibilities. And again, calling out DHS here. So DHS has got the law enforcement, which we have HSI and Secret Service. We then also have the defense with the CISA organization, a very, very large agency. On the regulatory side, DHS has strong responsibility in the chemical industry and several others. There's then a category called sector risk management agencies. And these are agencies that have been defined to represent the interests of a critical infrastructure sector. And so each critical infrastructure sector that has been designated by DHS has an agency that is tied to it. And we'll talk through what some of those are. And those sector risk management agencies may have information sharing support. They may have other functions. And then that fifth function that we'll see in the federal civilian enterprise or federal cyber enterprise is going to be intelligence. And that's often against our foreign threats, but it's also a few US members of the US intelligence community have domestic responsibilities. Key takeaway here, it is massively complex, and who you call depends on a lot of different factors that we'll walk through. And this is just the federal level. And we've got a lot of levels of government.
So what we're not really talking about are the agencies that we in the incident response industry typically talk about. And so what we're talking about is intelligence and investigation, but not privacy regulation. So obviously, when you respond to a healthcare incident, you're always going to be dealing with the data regulator, which is HHS. Education has FERPA, DOD has all of its contracting information. All of these federal agencies have an interest in the data that falls into their particular sphere of responsibility. But we're not in this discussion talking about the standard incident response questions of who do you have to notify if data goes the wrong way. Now, this is not a complete list, Kellyn, correct? There are other agencies here, agencies that have responsibilities for data.
Exactly. And we're really not looking at any of those. It's the mandatory piece. The government agencies, you have no choice but to work with, depending on who an insured or who a victim of a cyber attack is. We're looking at agencies and organizations you may encounter where it is voluntary and what are the pros and cons of engaging with those partners. And this is where we get to as well the offices, because HHS absolutely has a regulatory component. But on their sector risk management agency, those interests are served by the Healthcare Cybersecurity Collaboration Center, HC3. Different offices, supposed to be walled off, in my experience, typically walled off. But so it's different offices, but we're really focusing on those where you may have voluntary participation, or potentially they show up in the course of an incident response, and what that might mean for your incident response. Now, if there's one takeaway, government's massively complex. We knew that. But what are the key considerations for who to engage with, when to engage, et cetera? And the first is know your size. And this is really from the perspective of the victim or our insured or an enterprise, right? Know who you are, because each one of these agencies has different thresholds. And so this is where working with expertise, again, is really critical to being able to navigate this massive ecosystem. A really small mom and pop convenience store that has a cyber incident, they're not going to get the FBI showing up when they have malware on their point of sale terminal. Maybe if there is a local law enforcement that actually has a cyber unit, they can get support. But it's going to be different if you're a multinational corporation or a core tech provider or a defense contractor, right? Knowing what size you are and who is of interest can help determine which government agency is going to be able to provide what level of support. You will hear some briefings where they say you call up the FBI and they'll get an agent out there. That's not always true. And then also the knowledge level of that agent, whether they're actually cyber or just there to take a report, can really differ. Know who is in your operational area. I mentioned before the idea of the mom and pop convenience store. If we look where you are, really depends on what support you can get. I mentioned a local law enforcement agency. Most do not have cyber units. Most rely on the FBI for cyber. They say cyber it's federal. The criminal is almost never going to be in my jurisdiction. It's not totally true, but they say no when they pass it. But if you're in Silicon Valley, if you are in the San Francisco Bay Area of California, almost every local law enforcement agency has a cyber task force officer who is trained in how to respond. So it really just depends on where you are as to what support is there. Key thing being, you're not going to figure that out when you are hair on fire, or your insured's not going to figure that out when they are hair on fire during incident response. These are questions you need to answer and connections you need to build before people are having the worst days of their professional careers, or work with a partner who can get them to the right party and knows this ecosystem ahead of time. And then that third key consideration is knowing what you actually want from the government. Various government agencies, even those with a law enforcement mission, like the FBI, may be able to provide information which supports your incident response. And so they'll be able to provide indicators of compromise that can guide your investigation from a technical perspective. Some are going to be there only for the law enforcement context, to take the report, to pursue criminal prosecution of the individuals. We're talking ransomware and extortion. We know how rare that is, but that is increasing year over year. But so you really have to know why you want to engage with the government. And again, answer these questions ahead of time, not with your hair on fire.
I, of course, like anybody who does incident response in this area, have been on the phone with very small businesses that say they called the FBI or I filed an IC3 and I haven't heard back yet, but I'm waiting for a response any day now. And of course, we know that response is not coming. And it's important that in order to maintain the trust of your clients, that they understand why that response is not going to come, and that they are going to have to rely on you because although some of them say, I pay my taxes, I don't understand why this isn't happening. The explanation is basically all that Kellyn has just said. This is a big country. It involves a lot of investment of a lot of different agencies and different sectors. and the size and nature of your location matters a lot.
And what you're
So-
getting out of it, right? Like
Go ahead,
what you're
Kellyn.
seeing out of the relationship. If you're looking at, there's a fraudulent wire transfer and you have the right time period, there is a limited window after that, then yes, law enforcement may be able to action. But again, you can't do that by calling 911. You're not getting to the right person. And I have had victims call 911 before, and the dispatcher says, file an IC3 report. If you're lucky, they will say that. Otherwise, they will say, that sounds terrible. There's nothing I can do. This is not an emergency. And you're like, I've had $1 million leave my bank account and go to a criminal. That seems like an emergent set of circumstances, but it is not to 911.
So in an incident, let's look at those seals again. Who are you contacting here?
I mean, the FBI is who everyone goes to, right? They file their IC3 report and they wait for the phone call.
Yeah. And pretty much everybody else on here, although they've all got cyber responsibilities, are not going to be the people that respond to your agency. So, to your client. So, you know, how do you get engaged with these agencies and when? That's really what we want to talk about.
So on the intelligence sharing and information sharing side, again, not relationships you establish during the incident. These are relationships that either an enterprise, your questions to ask your IR providers or your counsel partners. Do you have these relationships? For your clients to be armed to ask if they use a managed detection and response company. Are you using these resources? Are you engaged here? Is this information you are using to protect me? There's a variety. The government has gotten so much better, the federal government, at collecting information about cyber threats. One noteworthy organization is the National Security Agency. They actually do unclassified sharing. It took them a really long time to get there. They used to just send like 2-word sentences that there was a flaw somewhere in an environment, and that was less than actionable in the kind of intelligence sharing land. But they stood up the Cybersecurity Collaboration Center, which puts our National Security Agency resources directly next to companies who are engaged in defending the nation. And they share out details every single day. I have gotten 3 alerts from the NSA CCC today alone. And that's information that we can then use to inform proactive defense. So again, while it might not be relevant to a specific enterprise, if you're a construction firm, should you really have an NSA CCC point of contact? No, but their MDR provider probably should, because construction firms, would you believe it, are actually a target for espionage. So you want to have that relationship ahead of time or have a partner in your supply chain with that relationship. They are going to particularly support in on state-sponsored threats. So who are our foreign adversaries who are attacking? China, Russia, North Korea and Iran are going to dominate that conversation, but there are some others as well. CISA, Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency, they have a huge intelligence sharing and information sharing mandate. Obviously ignoring or calling out that this changes and the resourcing changes on all of these at any moment. But these right now these 2 at least are fairly stable from their information sharing and what we've continued to see out of them. But CISA offers multiple avenues of sharing. So if we're looking at the top level, when we talk machine to machine, so for a lot of intelligence sharing to prepare and prevent a cyber attack, we want it to be machine to machine because we want to move faster than what humans are going to action. And so they offer the automated indicator sharing feeds. Again, not going to be something most enterprises are going to necessarily need to sign up for unless we're talking large. If you're working with a hospital, if you're working with a large energy provider, they can absolutely, and they're running their own defense, they can sign up for this feed. And it just provides an extra layer of defense on their existing technology stack. But again, you have to establish this early. Now, CISA also provides alerts, which are public. These are really useful to you can publicly subscribe to these. I work with a lot of insurance partners, and a lot of them are signed up for these, or if they're not, we do recommend it because CISA does a great job of highlighting some kind of core initiatives or some core problems that are heading up. Recently, they've published on some supply chain threats, which are impacting development environments. Very critical, and we're actually seeing broad impacts across insured space. So again, that can just give you some awareness of what's coming down. For enterprises, we can take the rules that they publish, the details, and use that for prevention. And then there's also the Joint Cyber Defense Collaborative within CISA, which is the more similar to what I described with the NSA CCC, is it's about getting industry and government together to share and defend the nation. There's also InfraGard. While I said the other two are fairly stable in terms of funding, InfraGard is currently not accepting new members, but you may see that a lot of folks are members of InfraGard. It's kind of the original FBI stood it up to get threat information out to critical infrastructure providers and provide some of that public-private collaboration. If folks are signed up to InfraGard, it does give some bulletins still. I think the most active poster is the Railway Alert Network. So if you've got a rail partner, maybe try and connect there. And then there's also local fusion centers. This becomes very dependent on where you are or where an insured is in the nation as to who they might be able to work with. Most, and these were stood up in the aftermath of 9/11 to facilitate information sharing among federal, state, local, tribal, and territorial governments and critical infrastructure private sector. Almost all have a cyber capability, and most of them have a private sector liaison program to get critical threat information out, physical and cyber. And so depending on where you are, there's a different way to contact. Again, this is not something, though, I recommend navigating if you don't know the environment because it is highly specific, but it's all different ways you can get information, which can help you prevent an attack. And then on the other side, the main reasons to engage, we're looking at our law enforcement partners, which Rich and I have talked some about who are you going to call and what's the value there. You know, with Secret Service and FBI, they both have task forces as well where local members are trained in these things. One of the war stories I have, the greatest success I've ever had of working with law enforcement actually came through a Secret Service task force officer. We had a small municipality. It was a business email compromise, standard intercept of a vendor, and the victim transferred $1.8 million. At the time, that was one of the largest BECs we had seen. Now, the municipality got really, really lucky. 3 reasons. 1, they identified it within hours of the fraudulent wire transfer, not months later, as we so often see. 2, they made the fraudulent wire transfer on a Friday, which with that amount, it then got caught in the federal banking, or got caught in the international banking infrastructure and held up, so it wasn't fully approved. And then their local law enforcement agency had a Secret Service task force officer who could start the process to actually recoup those funds. And so that victim was able to recover all of their funds. That is not a situation that's going to happen most of the time because it's super time dependent, relies on having the right office. There's certain benchmarks for what amount in order for that to be able to happen in timing. But that's the greatest success I've ever had in working with law enforcement, was successfully recovering funds. That is not the norm, not what will typically happen, but just an example there of who to engage with and what can happen on the good side. We'll talk a lot about what might happen the other direction.
We have also had a lot of good success at clawing back funds, even beyond the 72-hour kill chain window. It's really, in many ways, a question of continuing to push buttons and also doing the forensic investigation, which some kind of can shift the responsibility to it, somebody else. So anyway, different topic. Just addressing the local resources part, it always pains me to have an insured say, I contacted my local police department, because that generally means that a somebody comes in a patrol car and writes something in a book and drives away. Even the most sophisticated police departments, I worked endlessly with the Philadelphia Police Department, they had no clue. Small police departments are going to have less to do with this. You really do need federal help here.
Thank you. And that's, again, work with a partner that knows which level and how to engage. In certain agencies, it's so dependent. All right, building the relationship.
How do you do this? So government does a really good job at being unapproachable. They want to have that air of invincibility and irresistibility. If I tell you to do something, you have to do it. It's the reason that police officers wear uniforms and drive marked cars, because when they show up, they expect their commands to be followed. The same is true for the non-uniformed agencies. FBI, of course, expects that they're going to be viewed as a very intimidating agency. It's not their job, and it's not, frankly, what they do. Alan, if you can hit the button there. The dirty secret is that they need you. They don't want to admit it, but they need information from the private sector. They need it from insurance carriers. They need it from individual victim industries. They need to know what's going on in the field. Kellyn mentioned InfraGard. When I've been to, I don't know how many dozens of InfraGard meetings where I've stood up as a prosecutor and said, please call me, tell me what's going on. No one ever did. And that's entirely understandable. If businesses have vulnerabilities or concerns, they don't want to share it with the government. So the way you approach the government to get what it is that you want depends on what they need and how you talk to them. And you need to find people who can speak the language with them. If you don't respond to them, you're not going to get anything from them. If you find a way to say no respectfully, you may still get things from them. They understand you have your own agenda. But what you need is going to turn the question of how you actually talk to them. Next. So why do you want to engage with the government? And here's our polling question. Which government entity do you feel most comfortable contacting during a cybersecurity incident? Again, no wrong answer. Again, you have to answer, otherwise you don't get credit. And now you have more than two choices, so you might have to think about it for the remaining 10 seconds that we're going to give you.
Yeah, we're about at 83% that have participated. So I
Okay.
know there's more people out there that need to get those answers in.
Maybe we have to wake them up. Do they make a loud noise or something?
Slam your hand on the desk.
Okay. Answer the question.
We're at 91%, so I'm going to go ahead and
Okay.
take it down.
Oh. Okay.
I'm honestly surprised to have seen 6 on the local fusion center. I didn't expect most new. I think it greatly depends on where you are located in the world as to who answered that, or where you are located in the nation.
Excellent. Okay. So we'll talk about these answers going forward. Let's talk about pre-incident stuff. So obviously, you can use these agencies to help you get information ahead of time. Correct, Kellyn?
Correct. So a lot of what I was talking about on the intelligence sharing and that information sharing, and the FBI is one of the law enforcement agencies that'll split the difference and do both, is really about pre-incident. It's about preventing threat activity. Even if you don't need this, business partners do. Somewhere in their supply chain, this is a question that should be asked, especially if you are in a targeted or high risk or critical infrastructure industry. They can provide regular updates on indicators. Again, those technical defensive measures that we're going to use to proactively identify. There is few things worse, in my opinion, than when I am working a matter and we have a victim that comes in and their environment is destroyed. It is a complex response and recovery and remediation. And we're starting to pull apart what happened, and we see it was known indicators. Every single step that the threat actor took was known through a publicly available, or it was available through the CISA alerts I was talking about, or maybe a direct relationship. They had, the information was there to protect that organization, and who they were relying on to protect them didn't use it to defend them. It's very frustrating to see that. So these partners can provide that. In limited instances, there may be some with pre-incident planning resources as well, particularly on the DHS and CISA side. Again, if you're a large organization, they may do planning. Sector risk management agencies might do tabletop exercises where you can be with peers, like, or where your insureds or your business partners can be with insureds or with partners of the same industry, and they can just see and learn from each other's response practices. These are a little bit less common, but they are out there. And so the FBI, even the Bureau of Justice Assistance, I think, has some programs here that can help as well. So there is some support there towards if you've never built an incident response plan, or your insureds haven't, there are some federal resources that at least give you some best practices, or give them some best practices to build off of.
Okay. Next. Yep. Go ahead, one more.
Again, I'm the pre-attack person. I would much rather you engage, or your partner know when to engage ahead of time, because also it can help you defend yourself. But then we have that second piece of knowing who to call. The last thing a victim should be doing, if law enforcement is part of their incident response plan or part of their communications plan, I know Rich is going to talk about that in a little bit. If it's part of your plan or part of the insured's plan to engage law enforcement or the government, you need to know that contact ahead of time. If IC3 is the checkbox you need, excellent. Particularly if you're paying a ransom or potentially going that route, IC3 is a checkbox you likely need. And you need to know who can help with what. This goes back to our conversation around disrupting fraudulent wire transfers and the financial aspects. Knowing who to appropriately engage there quickly is critical. Not only having your communications, but knowing who your contact is exact same as we say, make sure you have your printed IR plans, make sure you have your printed contact sheets, have out-of-band communication channels established for whoever your preferred law enforcement contact is, and then know your timelines for actions. There again, really referring to financial fraud, although to Rich's point, there have been successes past the 72-hour window.
Yeah. Now, I'm going to be a little bit of a fly in the ointment here, because everything that Kellyn said is exactly right. However, one of the problems with these agencies is that part of their designed mission, and this is actually an anti-corruption measure, is to move agents around. So in the FBI, you're generally going to be at least in 3 different locations in the course of your career, and that's if you don't want to be promoted. If you do want to be promoted, there's going to be even more. So You've got a great contact at the Bureau. You know exactly who to call. You have an incident, you call that number. That contact has now moved 2,000 miles away. They're probably going to be able to hook you up pretty quickly with who you need to talk to, but that relationship is over. It's a persistent problem, which means, and the agencies know it too, so they work hard on it. They try to keep everybody in the loop about who to contact. This doesn't always work. The other problem is a lot of businesses, and I think rightly so, want to determine what vulnerabilities they have in their system without telling the government about it. So that is why we do privileged and counseled compliance auditing with companies so that we can figure out where the vulnerabilities are, the security gaps, do the pen testing under privilege, where the company has control of the information that's generated, and they don't feel like they have essentially opened the door to the government to see what's going on inside their corporate walls. So it's preparing is good, but there are risks that come with it.
And Rich, you were kind there with the movement of your contact. Right now, the movement of your contact may happen faster than normal office rotation. So it is important to check in and make sure your contact and that office is still doing their continued mission and they are still on that. My liaison and I stay in very close contact just to make sure in the emergency situation, we can get the action we need quickly. So there's some additional caveats that keep the board pieces moving faster than normal. I do see we have a question, and I'm going to defer this to counsel because I said likely need to file an IC3 if you're paying a ransom. I just caveat because I'm just going to always caveat, you know, there might be an edge case, there might be an edge scenario. I always go defer to counsel.
So there's no question that filing an IC3 is what the Treasury Department has indicated they're looking for at a minimum to avoid sanctioning a particular business. So I don't think there's response counsel anywhere that would say, oh, you don't need to file an IC3. But as Kellyn said, there could be an edge case. So it's not a specific requirement. It's not required by statute. It's required more by education from the Treasury Department. We'll call it that. Okay, next.
During an attack and what the resources. I've talked about this a lot. They may be able to provide your government partners. FBI in particular has indicators of compromise sheets that provide kind of key infrastructure tools used by the adversary that you can use to hunt in the environment. I will tell you, they have never provided a sheet that wasn't already with information that wasn't already known from our prior IRs. In fact, they're usually getting those details to your point earlier about they need you. They're getting those details from the prior responses we're already working and kind of the collaborative sharing that happens there. But it can definitely help guide the investigation. Attacker identification. In limited cases, they may be able to support in sanctions assessment in cases of payment. I have heard some folks say that you can call the FBI and say, I have these indicators, and they'll say if they're sanctioned or not. In my experience, that's not always what happens. But it is, some folks will say that. In my experience, it's not. The fraudulent wire transfers. An enhanced sense of security. During an attack, we may see very limited cases where the threat actor threatens violence. Bomb threat, most commonly, but there may be some other kind of threat of violence or threat to an individual. With some of the English-speaking younger crews currently conducting ransomware and extortion operations, they may engage in direct contact with employees and create a threat of violence. We do also have a couple other threat groups that recently have done things like send flowers to the home of the CEO, perceived as a physical threat. In those cases, the victim will often opt to have some type of law enforcement report, and it may enhance kind of the corporation's sense of security. Could be from a contractual partner requirement that drives that law enforcement or government engagement, reputational benefit if it's part of your communications plan, or a carrier requirement. One additional case, it's not on the slide, but I guess in the guiding a response, in limited cases, there are close hold decryptors. Very, very rare. Your IR partners should already be working with the government and have a conversation to have with your preferred partner. They are close hold. Very often those confidential decryptor capabilities have a limited shelf life. They do not consistently work. Every single one we've had to modify in some way, and it still only works about 50% of the time. So it's not a silver bullet, but we will also see some clients or some folks really don't want to pay a ransom, have a really destroyed environment, and they may request that government engagement, and we'll validate within an hour or two. Again, knowing who to contact is really critical there to be able to get a clear answer on that, and that they can trust you to then give the decryption capability. So that is one small benefit that I see. Very limited use cases, but is one potential for why to work with government during an attack.
So to answer the question that's in the chat, they do try to warn businesses if that particular business is targeted. That's typically, they have found stolen credentials in the dark web, typically for sale. So they'll reach out to the business and they'll say, hey, we found your credentials for sale on the dark web. If you receive a notification like that from law enforcement, the first thing that should happen is your IT manager or CISO should take a look at what the threat is and determine how serious it is. And you may want to, at that point, first reach out to your insurance carrier, because you may need a forensic investigation into what the particular threat is. Kellyn is not going to be able to advise all businesses on warnings that they get from the government. So if you get a call like that, you may be able to cut off an imminent ransomware attack. So getting a full response is the best and most complete way. If it turns out it's nothing, then it's a very little response, but it could be critical.
And it's not just the credentials. We may also see it on the side of, particularly after a state-sponsored intrusion, when the government unveils indictments, they'll go around and do a lot of victim notification. In those cases, you're looking at an intrusion that was sometimes months to even a year prior. Again, you're going to want to contact the insurance company, validate what resources you have available, and then go through your standard incident response plan.
So we talked about ransom payment a little while ago. The Treasury Department no one has made ransom payment illegal. It's not illegal. There's a reason for that, and that's because ransom payment is unfortunately necessary sometimes. Everybody wants to avoid paying ransom, but if you're going to put 10,000 Americans out of work or not pay bills that need to be paid, then payment of ransom may be necessary. Treasury has put out guidance that says you need to do an OFAC check. This is standard practice with every incident response firm that negotiates ransom and facilitates the payment of ransom. Report to the government is generally viewed as a indication that the payer of the ransom does not intend to violate any Treasury restrictions on payment to a prohibited person. So why don't we move to the next? Here's our next polling question. What's your top concern when it comes to reporting an incident to law enforcement? Legal risk, business disruption, public exposure, lack of benefit. And while we're doing that, I'll answer the polling question. If you pay ransom, how does the victim ensure the environment will be returned fully unscathed without dormant threats? First of all, it's never returned fully unscathed. Generally, things get broken during ransomware attacks. So if you get a 90% functional system, that's a win. The dormant threats are really about generally the installation of software to look for those threats. And again, this is an area for forensic experts to advise the company, even when they pay the ransom.
Yep.
Legal risk.
You'll go through this.
Excellent. Okay. We'll move ahead. So Kellyn,
myths.
you myth bust, and
I myth
bust
bust.
your myth busting.
And these are myths with asterisks. This is the best case scenario. The government is much better than it was 10 years ago, but Rich will kind of close us out with the reality there. Reporting to law enforcement means they will come in and seize all of my computers. Hopefully not. Most of the training they receive today now says do not do that. At most, forensic image of the computers. Reporting to law enforcement increases the chance of the attack becoming part of public record. This is where law enforcement is different. Law enforcement sensitive information has different kind of considerations. You need all the information before reporting a cyber incident to law enforcement. To Rich's earlier point, the government needs you most of the time if you're looking to help and contribute to preventing, detecting these threats at scale. Anything helps. And then reporting increases the likelihood of legal or regulatory repercussions for the attack. As long as certain key legislation currently gets renewed, that is not necessarily true. But Rich, what's our yes split?
Yep. I think a lot of those are not myths. It's not a myth that reporting can prolong the incident, because you report something to the FBI, they want to investigate it. And sometimes they catch people. I have had to go back to my clients 2 years after the fact and say, hey, guess what? They caught the guy. We need records, and somebody may have to come to court. Nothing makes an insured more unhappy hearing that. They thought this was over, and then that makes the carrier pretty unhappy too, that this claim has to be reopened. Reporting also may vitiate the attorney-client privilege. So if we're likely to get sued because of a data privacy incident, then providing that information to law enforcement may come back in the civil suit to hurt us. Not becoming part of the public record. It's not a myth. It is true. It is remote. If they catch somebody, sometimes that's pretty sensational, particularly if you're in a relatively small community where it's a pretty interesting news story. So you thought the incident was over and nobody knew about it. You're the local hospital, and now you're front page news again. So first they have to catch the guy. They have to do all that stuff. They try to protect you. But if it comes out, it could become true. It doesn't mean they're going to seize all your computers, but I have had law enforcement say, well, we want to come and pick up patient 0, the computer where this started, and maybe some of the servers connected to it. So they're not going to come and take all your computers, but they may want to take some of them. The bottom line is that their focus and their mission is not the business's focus. The business just wants to get back to work as quickly and cheaply as possible. Government's trying to catch somebody when they're responding. So you have to walk the fine line between cooperating, because sometimes it's required and they can issue subpoenas, and protecting the business. And the way to do that is to have experienced people respond to law enforcement and help protect the business during the course of these incidents. And we're at 1 o'clock. And we hope that we have enlightened your day and made it more enjoyable. Kellyn, any final words?
The government can be helpful, but the government is a risk, right?
And that's our concluding word. Thank you all for coming. And if you have any questions, feel free to reach out to us. We're very easy to get a hold of. Have a great day.
Thanks, you guys. Great job. Thank you.